Hi, my name is Charles Delman. I'm professor of mathematics here at EIU, and when I was asked to speak about the budget crisis and prepare some remarks, I was asked to consider what I thought was most important in order to understand the crisis first, and then what effect I thought the crisis would have on education and what should be done about it, basically. So I think what's most important to understand is to understand the crisis in a broader context of the kind of demonizing and defunding of the public sector over the past several decades. My backdrop slide here kind of gives a sort of taking a page out of Glenn Beck here, I guess, but my sort of vision of how public education, in particular, a robust public education system and in general a robust public sector in areas such as education and healthcare contributes to a better society. And over the past several decades, that contribution has been devalued with, as I will demonstrate, some pretty dire consequences. And the current budget crisis is really just the crisis that has resulted from that or a crisis that has resulted from that long process. To focus in on what's happening here at EIU, I went to the Illinois Board of Higher Education data books, which are an excellent source of information about education, higher education in particular in Illinois, over the years, and they've kept this data since the 1970s in a parallel format, so it's very easy to compare. And I extracted here in this chart the percentage of EIU appropriations that come from the state, from the general fund, versus the percentage that come from the tuition fund or income fund. So this graph reflects, of course you can see it's a perfect mirror image. When one goes up, the other goes down. And this gives a sense of the extent to which the state has committed itself to funding public education and making it affordable for students. Obviously, the less the state gives from the general fund, the more students and their families have to make up in tuitions. You can see that the state percentage has gone steadily down. It was about 80% in the 70s, and in fact it peaked, I think that would be 1974. It hit its peak at 84%. Therefore, families were then paying only 16% of the cost of education, which made it very affordable for people from all different kinds of socioeconomic backgrounds. That state percentage has steadily declined, and right now it's under 50% right now. So right now, students are actually paying about 55% of the cost, and their families, of course, as well. And the from public funds, the state is contributing only 45%. And you can see the state's contribution is some bumps in the road there, but basically been steadily declining over the past several decades. So why is this important? You might ask, okay, so students pay for their college, the public pays less, the students and their families pay more. Why is that bad? I've collected some data from the Century Foundation, which I think gives a snapshot of why that's a bad thing. If you chose not to go to a high-quality public university such as EIU, or one of the other public universities around the state, probably your other choice that you might be tempted to go to instead would be a high quality not-for-profit private university or college. There's probably very little incentive for you to do anything else. If you look at the elite colleges here, which are the most selective, these would give you a very high quality education with many educational resources, lavish resources to some extent. Of course, tuition is high, and only some of them can offer substantial financial aid, only the most wealthy of these colleges. But if you were to get in, and receive enough financial aid that you could afford it, you might choose to go to one of these places. It's hard to imagine why you would choose to go to any but the best of the private colleges, since EIU at a much lower cost and greater value will provide a very similar high quality level of education. This graph shows the backgrounds of students going to sort of the most selective and in some sense the most elite private colleges and universities in the country. And I don't choose this data to suggest that these colleges and universities are necessarily better than EIU. I think the quality of education that we provide here is excellent and excellent value. But these are places which you might go to if you didn't go to EIU. And if you didn't go to these, it's hard to imagine where you could find a good education of value that would compare to what you would get at EIU. As you can see from this graph, almost 75% of the students who go to these private colleges are from the richest quartile of the population, the richest 25%, the richest quarter. Then the next block comes from the next richest quarter, sort of upper middle quarter, but it's much smaller. And only a tiny percentage, less than 10%, come from the bottom half of the socioeconomic ladder, with only 3% from the poorest quartile. So why is this? I don't purport to know exactly. I think it's a mixture of economics. These colleges and universities are expensive, and as I said, only the wealthiest of them can offer substantial financial aid. And also, the criteria for admission have become have been shown to select largely from the upper middle class and upper classes, which is sort of ironic because these criteria that we're familiar with, such as the SAT scores and ACTs and so on, were originally introduced to introduce a measure of merit into college admissions. They were seen as opening up these elite colleges, which had basically had a very class-based system beforehand. But what always happens in an unequal society is that people with wealth and power learn how to game the system. So now there are SAT prep classes, and people with higher incomes can provide their children with much better funded public and private schools where they live, and so on. And so these select with from a combination of the selection criteria, which now favor people from upper incomes together with the economics. These colleges cannot possibly serve the bulk of the population who deserves to go to college and would benefit from going to college and is qualified to do so. And of course, many of these colleges are not that large either. So what's left for everyone else? Basically, the best education they're going to get is a place like EIU. So if we make EIU inaccessible and unaffordable, we are denying opportunities to a large portion of the population. That's why it's important that we fund places like EIU. So just as a sort of aside here, I thought I'd ask if anyone could identify the source of this quote. So the quote is, "What improves the circumstances of the greater part can never be regarded as an inconveniency to the whole. No society can surely be flourishing and happy of which the far greater part of the members are poor and miserable." Well, it happens to be Adam Smith, and I chose this quote because a lot of the destructive policies of privatization, what I would really call privateering, of gutting the public sector and turning over all of the services that we need to the private sector, which in many cases is not suited to provide them. A lot of that's done in the name of Adam Smith through, to some extent, a selection of the things he said out of context. So I thought it would be interesting to put up that quote. I got that quote actually from an article by Tony Judt in the recent issue of the New York Review of Books, which is excerpted from his book. Tony Judt's an eminent historian who has been doing a great deal of writing lately on the state of society in historical context.